Lifers podcast. Get with it or get forgotten.
So yeah, definitely like that. We have a few more questions if you're okay with that. I think we have about total about 3 or 4 more. The next one is, and I think we touched on this, so we can probably do it pretty fast, is how much does insurance dictate, change, alter your treatment, if at all, in outpatient?
Yeah, and it can and it does. Hopefully that where, even from with what we learned, and probably the same maybe goes for y'all, that was, maybe it was two classes, like long day classes, billing and things. And they said, you're going to get this again. Y'all probably got it like, 2 years ago, maybe at this stage of the game. Yes, I consider they're a dictator, but what we can do is have that level of learning to where we can best make it work in situation for the patient. I know that we talked to the example of that Medicare patient. I said, hey, he comes in on the 10th visit. Well, guess what, Kevin? That person, by the way, also has COPD, Parkinson's disease, and every other few days, he's going to probably drop off and not do so well. Mm-hmm. And so if I have him come on my 9th visit and I see that guy's got some good get up, guess what? We're going to do those functional outcome measures and tests today. Because on number 10, I don't know if he's going to be still in that same position. Yeah. So I think, again, those are the gray areas they don't teach you about school. You're just like, oh, I got to get progress note on my 10th visit. No, I need to make this work best for my patient. So maybe I need to be aware of that. Prognosis, if you have a better understanding of what you would expect, and you mentioned it's based also on your experience in being and working with that demographic, and while also using some forms of research that can help to give you guidance. That's another way of like, how many visits do I need? Some have a set point of 25 visits. So if that's a post-op knee and you only have 25, that's all you have. Can you still use them to the best as much as you can and communicate? But there are. We can be somewhat of that preventative manner, or where that we don't have to drop our ACE card until we know that we do in regards to getting more visits. So know to the degree of what that insurance plan looks like, and be sure to be upfront with the patient so that they're also aware of what that might lead. Because if they're only given 10 and you were set to do 20, that's going to be a brutal conversation to explain to them, by the way, we can't treat you anymore.
Yeah, man. I can definitely see how that's important for sure. And I know you talk about, just to kind of go to the next one, is I know we talk about the importance of soft skills and how that is something we can work on, even before we go to rotations. We can be conscious about how we explaining things to our loved ones, and how are we actually communicating our message of what we're trying to say, or maybe having more patience when we speak to people. What are actual things didactically, I guess I'm speaking, that students can do to prepare for their outpatient rotation? Is it reviewing their special tests? Is it, knowing their range of motions? Like, what are some of those things that you would say, okay, if you're coming in here, I want you to be able to kind of already know this?
Right. Yeah, good question. And, and I think that's one that most often is asked by a lot of the students prior to them coming on to the for their internship. And for myself, being outpatient, and again, just saying outpatient, Kevin, as you're aware, that doesn't always mean, for like our clinic, we're seeing everything: cervical, headache, dizziness, TMJ, shoulder replacement, falls, balance. Mm-hmm. I mean, the list goes on. Yes. And otherwise, other places, it's always going to be the general lower back pain and shoulder and knees, and that's it. So relative to where you're going, I ask that you can look at those clinical practice guidelines. Those are all, of course, provided, through APTA. I think there's maybe potentially, I don't know, about 7, 8, could be 9 of them. But those being the primaries, they're very useful because it collectively takes all the things you need: diagnosis, evaluation, prognosis, your outcome forms, which ones are most valid and reliable. So it's great because it's a one-stop shop, and you having to go through maybe 5 of your different books, learning manuals, and notes to get that. So to me, I think that's always the first thing, just to get a really base piece from what you might want to have as in preparation. And second to that, I think is where you were talking about just communicating and conversation. I think the one that I really would put a lot of challenge for many is being mindful with what words we choose, or what we refer to as nocebo, and or putting. I think that the more classic is bone on bone, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, oh, the doctor said my knees are bone on bone. Well, I consider that as a form of nocebo. We're creating a degradation, something we know that we can't change. How is this going to motivate? How is this going to uplift or do anything more for the patient? It really doesn't. So I don't look at those same sense of where we also going to say, hey, you're weak. Oh, you lack this range of motion. That's like when I was a trainer back in my younger years, and I'd have a client come in, and what do you want me to tell them? Hey, by the way, you're fat. No, they're going to look at me and say, all right, Chris, you realize why I'm here. Thanks for pointing that out, right? So to me, I think that's the bigger component, is really just trying to share with the patient and just make them at ease. And that's why special tests have their uses and for good, but not as the ultimate. And get your assessment, get your evaluation, know what you're doing, and within listening and what that patient's trying to share with you. If they do, a lot of times they're going to tell you what they need. They're going to tell you what treatment's going to work for them, based also by what you educate them. So, yeah.
Okay, so put it like, I think tangibly we can say, okay, review your CPGs, you know, understanding, you know, now how you would explain things to people clinically. Now,
Big one.
That's a big one. Okay.
Are you expected, Kevin, or to like the week prior to your internship, like reach out to your mentor, or do they reach out to you? What's that process look like for y'all?
Based on what I remember, they're supposed to reach out to us 6 weeks out at the. Okay. I guess that's the maximum that a way that they or the minimum. I don't know how to put it. They have to reach out to us 6 weeks before, and then we reach. You know, we talk to them. Yeah. After that,
and that's probably
we can't talk to them first. They talk to us.
Right. Yeah, they got to wait for the reach out, and I think that's where you could probably get more explicit within the response. Be sure to and ask. I think a lot of do is like, hey, what do I need to know? I'm not one that really wants you to have to prep and go back over your AIONs and insertions unless that you ultimately feel that you need to. That's not what the learning is going to take place. It's what you've already learned and putting it all together to make it seem more mainstream. And oh wow, I see the whole picture of it. And that's going to be the bigger, I think, rollout with it.
But for last question,
sure thing.
Is what do you think is the difference between a good and a great physical therapist?
Now you got to lead by example. So I think, and by those examples, which demonstrates a lot of the things that what we just touched upon in the profession. I guess it's sort of the same like with what we look at from our company standards. It's one thing that what I would say is good is because you meet the criteria of with what's expected. What makes you great is when you go above and beyond that. If you want to call it from just your own incentive, you just step in to say, I'm going to be proactive and go. I think that's probably the bigger breaking point. I think that driving force is what just you hinted upon, saying passion. When I first started my job and getting hired and talking to the VP, and he's like, well, what is passion? What does that look like? And I got a little stumped on that, just from like, well, I don't know, come to my clinic and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's probably the more critical of how do you demonstrate that? Do you go above and beyond and exceed? whether that's from a community standpoint, whether that's embracing research, if that it is. Doesn't even need to be that. Maybe you're helping with one of your colleagues that you see needs a little improvement, right? When we all are there as our first year as a PT, that's still a very scary thing, you know? Or you as one of those like, hey, this is now my colleague, let me help to contribute. Those ways of where you're stepping up, not that it's part of your job, but you see fit. So for the greater good, if we really want to be silly with it. Yeah, that I think would be the bigger of. What made you ask that question, Kevin?
You know, because I had an experience with something that I like to personally ask kind of every PT that I meet, and the one I remember being told once, it was the answer that the gentleman gave me was, it's being a good car salesman, and that's the way he led it. And I was like, my reaction was like, what do you mean? Like, that's a weird thing to say. And his response was, you can have the best treatments in the world, but if your patient doesn't trust you or doesn't believe you, it's not going to work. Whether you can have good treatments, but that patient trusts you and believes you, just going to work. So you have to be able to communicate and have a patient believe you that you're there for them, and that your job is to make their lives better. And I was like, oh, okay, that you know, and I guess for him that was the difference between being a good and great salesman, is not focusing on the skills of the tools like you mentioned before, but focusing on how those tools that you do have can help that patient and what they need specifically.
Yeah, admit that you're wrong. There'll be the times. Admit that you don't know. I think that creates just as much trust when the patient asks those kind of things than not having all the answers. So yeah, again, multifactorial. And it seems like even with a lot of our conversation of what we had and appreciative that we could, it really didn't reflect so much about physical therapy in essence, but just what are those mannerisms, characteristics, and aspirations, including our seeking in depth of knowledge, and where do we get that, and how do we recognize or determine, is this fluff, or is this something that's going to be of good value? It's really it, the principles. Mm-hmm.
For sure. I honestly, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your day. I know in these crazy times it is busy, and I can't thank you enough, and my classmates can't thank you enough, and those who do listen. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate you so much for taking the time.
Best of success. I know that you will on all of your interns. Hopefully we'll hear a little bit about the stories of them, at least after the first go round. Sure. But it will. Dust will settle. You'll look at it and you'll probably smile from it. I learned a lot in those internships of the things that I wanted to do, what was good, and also things that I know that I'm not going to or want to follow in pursuit. So yeah, I think all of what you asked, you got a pretty good student body, as it sounds from a lot of the questions that I think are of good value to ask. So yeah.